about this fake news.
Denzel Washington is one of my most favorite actors. He's a beloved actor throughout America. He's also an articulate speaker and a very charismatic and influential leader in all communities of our society. He's just very well spoken and very well respected. I appreciate his comments on most of and many of the current social problems in America today. Definitely a performer worth paying more and closer attention to and becoming a social leader in our society.
The issues around the legal system. Do you think we've made any headway in the
I
legal?
think it's more important to make headway in our own house. By the time the system comes into play, the damage is done. They're not locking up 7-year-olds.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I was in Chicago a couple of 3-4 weeks ago, and we saw these little kids on bikes with masks on the side of their head, like 5 or 6 of them. And the driver said, "Yeah, they're little yummies." I said, "Who?" He said, "Little yummies. Look up, Google Little Yummy." Little Yummy was an 11-year-old murderer.
Wow.
And you look at his picture, you'll see the headshot of him, and he's like this. And he got murdered at 11 by a 14-year-old.
Wow.
Who's doing life now, and a 16-year-old.
That makes no sense.
You blame the system? Where was his father?
Yeah.
It starts in the house. It starts in the home. And yeah, well, my father got locked up. Well, where was his father?
Yeah.
You know, like I did talk about my 3 closest friends, and they did, 15 to 25. One did 28, this and that. I was the only one of the 3 that had a father in my life, even though my parents were together. But I still had a father who was a gentle man and a good example, and they didn't. We can blame the system if we want, but they didn't lock any of us up at 7.
Yeah.
We were all doing enough to get locked up at 13. My parents sent me in another direction. They didn't have anybody to help them, and they kept doing what they was doing, and the system got them. So I don't. The system is rigged, but why? All the more reason not to help it.
I have to admit, I saw this piece by Denzel Washington so many times, and the only thing that I really took from it was the fact, and took from and agree with, is the fact that so many of these acts of violence are caused by absent fathers from the home. But it wasn't until recently, just a few days ago, I said I want to research I want to research about this Yummy case. This has to be one of the most saddening, terrifying, shocking, and it should have been, sadly, it should have been a world-changing story. It made the headlines of Time magazine, but it didn't cause any change. And now, almost 27 years after this horrible atrocity to human life and to the life of a child, and the loss of so much damage, so much loss, so much shock in the community, and so much loss of life, not only in the victims of gang violence, but also in the families of those who perpetrated this. This is not something that is a lifestyle for which we should aspire. This should not be aggrandized. This is a tragic, broken situation. You do not get cred for this. Your street cred will leave you dead, leave someone else dead. Amen. I'm going to read a little information off Wikipedia about this subject. Let me get everything going here. And let me get my glasses too. This is the case of Robert Yummy Sandifer. And I've got the Wikipedia page brought up. And I'm just going to read what it says. Robert Yummy Sandifer was born March 12th, 1983, just 3 years before my oldest child. And he died September 1st, 1994. On the same day my youngest daughter was born, he died. Sad, so sad. Let me just read it. Robert Yummy Sandifer was an 11-year-old American boy from Chicago. Sandifer's murder by fellow gang members in Chicago garnered national attention because of his age, resulting in his appearance on the cover of Time magazine in September 1994. Nicknamed Yummy because of his love of cookies and standing just 4 feet 6 inches tall, Sandifer was a young member of the street gang the Black Disciples. After committing murder, arson, and armed robbery, he was murdered by his own fellow gang members who feared he could become an informant and that he was attracting too much attention towards their activities. Coverage of Sandifer's death and retrospective on his short, violent life were widely published in the American media. Sandifer became a symbol of the gang problem in America and inner cities, the failure of social safety nets, and the shortcomings of the juvenile justice system. His early life. Robert Sandifer was born in Chicago, Illinois on March 12, 1983. Sandifer's mother, Lorena Sandifer, had over 30 arrests for prostitution, many of which were drug-related. Sandifer's father, Robert Akins, was absent throughout Sandifer's life due to incarceration for a felony gun charge. Sandifer was physically abused from the time he was an infant. Before he was 3 years old, Sandifer was already known to the Department of Children and Family Services, DCFS. Physical examinations showed that Sandifer was alleged to have had cigarette burns on his arms and neck, as well as linear bruising consistent with physical beatings. Lorena initially blamed the abuse on Sandifer's father, although she later recanted. In 1986, Sandifer and his siblings were removed from his mother's home by DCFS and were sent to live with their grandmother in Roseland neighborhood of Chicago. His grandmother's residence contained as many as 19 children on some occasions. By most accounts, his grandmother's home was not much better than Sandifer's previous home. Sandifer, by the age of 8, had quit attending school and began to roam the streets, stealing cars and breaking into houses. At the age of 10, Sandifer was arrested on charges of armed robbery. A psychological examiner at the time reported that Robert is a child growing up without any encouragement and support, and that he has a sense of failure that has infiltrated almost every aspect of his inner self. In 1993, Sandifer and his siblings were removed from his grandmother's home and were sent to the Lawrence Hall DCFS shelter on Chicago's north side, from which Sandifer ran away and never returned. From 1993 until his death, Sandifer's whereabouts and living arrangements remain unclear, although he continued to be arrested by the authorities. On August 28, 1994, Sandifer was ordered to do a favor for his gang. He opened fire several times with a 9mm semi-automatic pistol, striking several youths. Sandifer quickly fled the scene. Among his victims was a 14-year-old girl, Siobhan Dean, who was fatally hit by a stray bullet. On August 31st, while standing on a neighbor's porch after asking to call his grandmother, in whom he had the greatest trust, Sandifer was met by brothers Craig and Derek Hardaway, ages 16 and 14, who were both members of the Black Disciple street gang. Sandifer was told he was being taken to a safe house and ordered into a waiting car. Instead, he was taken to a railroad underpass at East 108th Street and South Dauphin Avenue and told to get on his knees. While kneeling, Sandifer was shot twice in the back of the head. This is not even easy to read. By the Hardaway brothers. Sandifer's body was discovered by the Chicago Police Department in the early morning of September 1st. Around 400 people attended Sandifer's funeral, which was held at the Youth Center for the Church of God in Christ on Chicago's northwest side. The Hardaway brothers were later convicted of Sandifer's murder. Derek Hardaway, age 14 at the time of Sandifer's murder, received a sentence of 45 years. He was released in December 2016. I don't know if he was actually released. I'm going to have to do some more research on that, but that was the younger brother who drove the getaway car. I guess Craig is the one who did the shooting. This is one of the most tragic stories that a human being could ever hear. And it just literally breaks my heart to even be a part. But I do think that, man, it's tragic. Tragedy for everybody. All these lives lost. And those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it.
As reporters, there are some stories that just stick with you through the years. And for our Tanya Francisco, it was the story of Yummy Sandifer, a young man who at 11 years old had a rap sheet longer than most adults. He died violently, gangland style, by 14 and 16-year-old brothers.
Well, tonight, for the first time, we hear from both of those brothers about that fateful night, what they've learned, and their hopes for the future. It's a story you'll only see on WGN.
At 36, Craig Hardaway is older, wiser, but he's also a little nervous when it comes to this interview.
I always saw media as the enemy.
20 years after a notorious murder that thrust him into the national spotlight, for the first time ever, he and his younger brother Derek are talking about the case that changed their lives forever.
It took me years to really admit and accept my role in it.
It was an unusually chilly September night in 1994 as the body of an 11-year-old was loaded into the back of an ambulance. He had been shot twice in the back of the head in a hit ordered by the leaders of the Black Disciples.
What happened that night?
Chaos.
Despite numerous requests over the years, this is the first interview Craig Hardaway has agreed to do. Craig was only 16 years old when his mugshot was plastered on TV, arrested for the murder of 11-year-old Robert Yummy Sandifer. His brother Derek, 14 at the time, was too young for his mugshot to be released. He was convicted of driving the getaway car. All three, Craig, Derek, and Yummy, members of the same gang, chasing money, respect, and trying to make a name for themselves.
For me, it was more like identity. It was more like, okay, I want to belong to something. I want to be a part of something.
It's an addiction. It's a strong addiction, and it pulls you in quickly.
It was a clear black night, a clear white moon. Warren G was on the streets.
The summer of 1994 saw Nate Dogg and Warren G's Regulate topping the charts, O.J. Simpson preparing for the trial of the century, and Chicago well on its way to recording 930 homicides, the second highest on record. Among the dead, 14-year-old Siobhan Dean, shot in the head by a stray bullet during a shooting spree in the city's Roseland neighborhood that injured two other teens. Chicago police quickly identified 11-year-old Robert Sandifer as the gunman. That led to an intense 3-day manhunt. Gang leaders decided that Robert needed to be silenced because he knew too much, so they ordered Craig to kill him.
Why did Robert die?
By means of not my control.
And was it your life versus his life?
Absolutely.
You thought it was that simple as either you do this or you die.
And that's how it always boils down. It's not like any wiggle room when you live in that lifestyle.
So you're saying you had no other choice?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Derek refused to leave his brother's side.
A lot of people don't know that he actually took me home, and I can just feel someone right. So when I asked him what's going on and he told me everything, I refused to let him go by himself.
I should have been more of a big brother and just get out, right? But at the time, that ain't the way you think. I'm still a minor, we still kids.
Hours after the murder, both brothers were in custody, and months later, they were convicted felons. Craig, 60 years for murder, Derek, 45 for driving the getaway car. They were the only two ever tried in the case, even though they say others were involved.
Why not tell?
Because I was believing in the foolishness they was telling me, as far as the gangs and that lifestyle.
What did they tell you?
How they gonna be there, support, take care of us, our families, everything.
And?
Nothing. Literally nothing. No letter, no contact, no money for me, my family, they needs, no lawyer, literally nothing.
Abandoned by their fellow gang members and isolated from their families, the brothers have spent the past 20 years rehabilitating themselves. Both have gotten their GEDs and associate degrees. Derek is cultivating his landscaping skills by working in the prison garden, and Craig is involved in anti-violence programs. But for Craig, there is one piece of unfinished business: reaching out to Yummy's family, who has not responded to him or us.
What would you say to them?
Wow, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'll answer any questions that they may have concerning that night, leading up to that night.
Both brothers say they think about Yummy's murder every day. The tears, they say, have long since dried up. Instead, they're focused on getting out one day and making sure that others don't end up on the same path that led them to prison.
I think if they hear it from someone that lived it and been through it, it might reach them a little bit better.
And I know most people listen to this and be like, what the hell do this dude know? He been in jail for 20 years. He should have did what he did, yada, 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 yada. That still don't take away from the message. Value your life. You matter. Look in the mirror and tell yourself that you matter. Accept that the responsibility of your life ultimately rests with you.
Derek Hardaway is eligible for parole in 2016. Craig Hardaway will be eligible in 2024. Neither brother plans to return to the Roseland neighborhood where they grew up for fear that they could be drawn back into a lifestyle that Derek says will only lead them back to prison or to a grave. Tanya Francisco, WGN News.
All right, thanks to Tanya. That was the first time I ever heard an age that young, 11, with Yummy Sandifer. That gripped not only the city but the nation, but the city for years.
Yeah, on the cover of Time magazine. Amazing.
Yeah.
Myself, a Uzi, and my brother a 9.
A police officer is dead after a drug bust and shootout in Gary, Indiana. It happened yesterday on the 2500 block.